Great. It's fantastic to be back with everybody for another fireside chat, again with Fariba Zamaniyan with TiVo and David Finkelstein with BDEX. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to be talking about political advertising. And we've already started talking a little bit going into this call, so I know we're all warmed up, ready to get into it. But let's just jump right into the very first question. So tell us in your own words, I guess we'll start with Fariba, why is there a lack of data used in political advertising right now? And feel free to build into that a little bit in your own words.
So I actually wouldn't say that it's so much there's a lack of data. There's actually a tremendous amount of data that goes into planning, executing, and delivering advertising for candidates across the country, whether it's a national campaign or a localized election. There's a tremendous amount of data that is available, whether or not the candidate has the funding in order to acquire the data they need in order to target the constituents in their district or all the way to a presidential campaign on a national level. The data is there, and in some cases, there's too much data. So what we've seen over the years is an incredible sophistication level that really goes back to President Obama and what he did in order to really perfect the process of geo and behavioral targeting to really bring his message to those individuals, whether they were swing voters or those that were, really not on Team Barack Obama. And that's really cascaded through into this new digital age. So there's a tremendous amount of data, and the one that's predominantly used, especially now as we're going into a big election year with the midterms this year, is voter registration data. And voter registration data is pretty much the basic set of classification that puts U.S. adults 18 plus into different buckets of their political preferences and whether or not they voted in the past. So there's an incredible amount of data that is available. And now it really is going to come down to, for each of the candidates, the amount of funding that they have and the sophistications of their teams and the agencies that support them in order to bring the most impactful campaign forward across screens.
Yeah, I think I would add to that there's also a lot of strategy in the sense that, and I think that's what's going to have to come out this year. It's going to be, I think, like you said, there's a tremendous amount of data out there, but it's how you use it and the strategy and your approach. I think that Obama had a very specific strategy and it really worked. I'd say that the last election was probably not as strategy focused. And I think this election will likely be more strategically focused. And I'm talking about addressing not just people based on location and based on their voter registration information and history, but also, like you said, in addressing behaviors, addressing tying the issues at hand to those behaviors, I think is something that really hadn't been done before. And maybe part of that was because of the lack of sophistication that existed, historically in those elections. But I think today we have those capabilities to literally zone in on, okay, let's look at what the issues are. Let's look at this specific issue that we want to focus on and focus our outreach on, and then find the people based on behaviors and psychographics and things like that are the right people to address that issue to, in order to help improve the effectiveness and the outreach to the people that actually will go to the polls.
And I think just to add to that, it's in what you're saying as well, David, it's about being nimble and flexible. And in this day and age, with the digital capabilities, especially now as we've gotten very deep into digital video targeting, and that can be done on such a refined and granular level, especially as you're thinking about, candidates that, there's a lot at stake for Republicans in particular. They need 5 seats in order to take back control of the House. So in a case like that, where there's so much at stake, a rigid execution plan is not going to have as much of an impactful result for that specific candidate as it is now taking advantage of the digital capabilities in conjunction with the traditional linear television, having a 15 or 30-second ad within the local news component of a program, is now there are even more ways on an interactive basis to reach the constituents that you're trying to basically defend against the competing candidate, but being nimble and building that into the execution plan based on these behavioral profiles that leverage the technology available is going to be key to success in this midterm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes to all of those things. And to go back a little bit and chime in a little bit on what David said, it goes really into that data quality and having data, any candidate that is collecting first party data and they're doing their targeting in a deterministic way, they're going to see results differently than those who are not doing that. And so I sort of speak to that with experience. So not to show off, but in 2008, I worked on the Obama campaign in a data collection capacity, and we did a lot of that. We asked a lot of behavioral type of questions. But then even when I moved into county elections and had more of a hands-on with modeling and Excel, we didn't have access to as much data at that point. But what we did do and what made us successful was that we were able to collect first-party data, yes, no, undecided, are you supporting our candidate, turn out those who are supporting us. I know David was talking about in a previous conversation we had, forgetting about those undecideds. Early on, luckily for us, we were doing door knocking and phone banking, so we were collecting first-party data, first-party voter data, so we knew where a lot of our voters stood, that we were able to send handwritten letters from the candidate to a lot of those undecided voters, but that was because we did the work early on. And then moving into the summer prior to the election and then into GOTV, we were able to just focus on turning out those yes voters and helping people make a plan to get to the polls. But then also our TV ads, we weren't running them deterministically back in 2010, but we did have a TV ad. And, I think that we did win, but had we had that capability and the technology that you're referring to, I think we'd be in a different place. So I think let's segue in here to our next question. I think we covered everything there. One thing, David, you didn't get into there the first time we brought this up was how a lot of the political advertising, besides the content being distasteful, because it gets down to again, quality, knowing who your supporters are and sending them the right message at the right time. And a lot of that gets into not getting into the slander. So that's what turns off a lot of the voters. Is there anything you'd want to add on that?
Yeah, that's what you and I were talking about. And I think that the ultimate goal, right, is to get people to actually vote. And so, when you end up in a situation where there's a lot of slander going back and forth, and a lot of times the ads are just he said this and she said that, and voted this way and he voted that way, or whatever it is, people get really turned off, and that actually, I think that actually deters people from going to the polls. And so that's where I think in that conversation, Jesse, you and I had, we were talking about how if they could leverage the data that's available today to understand what people want to hear better, right? And so here are the issues that are at hand, and here are the people that will support my issues, and then target those people that you believe that really will support your issues. The chances of you swaying somebody but with slander is really small. I think really what you're doing is you're really pushing people away from the polls. And maybe sometimes that's their plan because they want to push away people that
Or they're
are
down in the polls, and that's the only way to get
Yeah,
back up
yeah,
is to
exactly.
kick the other person.
Exactly. But I think that I think it's going to be important in the coming elections for the issues to really be the focus, and especially with the data that's available today, I think that they'll be able to do a much better job of especially online and in CTV, to be able to reach the right audience that wants to hear that message, and will be like, wow, that's really great. I'm going to go to the polls. That's who I'm voting for. And I think that's something that we have the ability and strength to do more so in the coming elections now than we've had in the past. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that changes things.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think where you just left off is really where I wanted to go in terms of this new audience that is available now in connected television. They're predominantly cord cutters. Nearly 80% are, have cut the cord from cable. In many cases, don't have a linear broadcast that will be reached by the traditional medium of, broadcast television ads on the local news channel. And also think about who that audience is. They're generally people who are older, in many cases over 70. But those are the voters, right? Those are the people that show up to vote. Mm-hmm. And they're going to do it regardless of the issues at hand because they are committed and believe more in the value of voting. And what's been generally hard is to attract younger voters. And younger voters tend to be more issue driven. They are very much more likely to be swayed by issues. I mean, they're certainly connected on social media, and that's been a primary channel of communication to that audience, specifically when it comes to peak years such as this one in the midterms. But what we have is the ability to really cater to that audience outside of social, where things can get more slanderous and influenced by opinions, not just from the candidate in their ads, but then in the reply chain and the commentary from everybody who's exposed to it. Mm-hmm. But in a traditional setting of video delivery within a content that you chose to watch this program through your connected TV, and let's say it's an ad-supported app, so an AVOD, advertising video on demand, is that you have the opportunity as a candidate to reach this audience that typically, in many cases, may not be voting or hasn't voted, with a message that is going to speak to the issues that mean something to them in your local districts. And those individuals, based with the technology, or those households, can actually be targeted to bring your message forward to them in a traditional linear or video experience versus all of the distortion that can take place in social, which we know that's happening just from community chats and so forth, that is going to continue on mediums like Facebook. But in the video world, where we think about how are we getting those messages across to our constituents, okay, I'm just going to go, robotically and buy some linear ads, is that now we have the ability to be nimble, to create different versions of the spots, to test them afterwards to determine how well they're doing in terms of response, in a very efficient manner that's all data driven, and can also be efficient because they're extensions of the investments you make on the broader, more efficient, cable TV buy. So I think those are all really good points, and it's an exciting year to see that, we have this capability. The data is there. Now it's a matter of bringing it together and working with the right partners to execute.
That's a really great point. And I'm glad you went into it. It makes me want to ask a question because I think it was in 2013, maybe for the 2014 election, but it was the last time I was working on a campaign. I had transitioned into fundraising, but we were still working with a lot of data. And it was a statewide election for Betty Yee, who's still currently the state controller of California. So that's a larger media market. So say I'm working on a statewide race, and we know that we're going to be coming in with TV ads around GOTV. Like, what do I do? Like, who do we go to? Like, what's the process?
Well, I mean, I think the first is, looking into your partners, an agency partner. There are specialists in every state and in many counties, particularly in swing states, where there are professionals that are well versed in the data assets that can help in defining, target lists in, specific districts, can put together a media buy working with the right associations, whether you're on the right or the left. So the RNC has resources that can help when it comes to a Republican candidate. The DNC also has resources, centralized resources that can also assist with those that are supporting candidates on the left. I did the hands backwards, but but I'm looking at a mirror image. Maybe that's what it is. But in any case, there are, depending on where the candidates, sits on the right or the left, there are resources to help them get started within their own, political party. And those are centralized assets. I know I can speak to one, for example, on the left. Target Smart is a digital first platform that enables smaller agencies to get access to data sets such as voter registration data, or provide them the means to be able to really define who is it and how they're going to target them, and to design campaigns that meet their budgets. Because that's really the biggest, contending factor, is how much money do you have to spend? Because unfortunately, none of this is free.
That's right.
I want to back up 1 second, though, just because, Fariba, you said something previously that really resonated with me around the younger generation voting. And so the last presidential election, my daughter was 18. And, obviously her first chance to vote. And she had an issue that was a public issue at the time that she felt so strongly about, and that she was like, I'm voting and this is who I'm voting for. When I was 18, I didn't vote, just because, I'm at school, I wasn't thinking anything from that perspective. But I think part of that is because of the difference between how information is disseminated today for younger generations. Like, they have access to this information, right, so easily, and they can be easily targeted as well by the right messages. And so it's really, really interesting to see that how involved the younger generation can be, in the next election. I think it's going to be more so than we've ever seen before.
I think, exactly right. And I think it's because what you said, when we were 18, it wasn't even, that's what the old people do.
Right.
It's because of what has happened with politics. It's part of the discussion. It's been a humongous cultural shift where we were never this interested in the right or the left and all of the nonsense that happens in between at our local level all the way up to the presidential election. But because of this culture shift that's happened over the last 2 decades, where politics is part of this, and I do think that the social platforms have played a big part in that, in bringing that into the dialogue that you have with friends and family, which oftentimes can become heated, debated, losing friends, unfriending people because you just don't want to talk to them about it. And that's the world that the younger generation lives within. And so it's part of their dialogue. And because of that, they're building very firm beliefs and stances on what they would be willing to do in order to make something come to fruition, which is voting. And so I think that there's a lot of work to do with the, for example, 18 to 24 group, like your daughter, that I think we don't pay enough attention to. Is they're going to be the future, that 70 plus voter that goes every year, whether it's a midterm or a local candidate. So I think the issue that I've seen, as well as we make it more difficult too, right? We might have the data on how to reach them, how we can, provide through all the different devices, because they certainly have more than one, although they're probably attached more to the mobile. So we've got a way to get the message to them beyond social. problem is we make it more difficult. And I'll tell you one story, like your daughter, my niece. The last presidential election afterwards, I asked her, hey, Emily, did you vote? She was like, no. I'm like, what? Why didn't you vote? She was like, well, because I go to school in Pennsylvania and I'm a New York resident. So I didn't do the absentee ballot in time. And you know, I was so busy, and which busy, we know what busy is, you know, they're having a good time too. So I think this is where universities and state college, community colleges, anybody who's coming in from out of state, we need to make the process easier too for those students to be able to vote from while they're in school, but to do so from an absentee perspective or figure out some other way. I don't have the answers. It's not my proficiency, but I think it's a matter of like, we've got the means to reach them with messaging, but what good does it do if we don't make it easy enough for people to vote? And I know there's a group of people out there that are trying to figure all that stuff out, but we have to bring that into the conversation as we look forward to the midterms this year.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that at my daughter's school, she's in New York, but she lived, you know, her home is in Florida, but at her school, they actually had a whole process where they would actually help you obtain an absentee ballot for whatever state you're in, and all that. So like, she got the help that she needed at school. But the school did it. It's not like, you know, obviously it's not something that's available everywhere for everyone that's absentee. But I thought that was kind of cool at the school.
That is excellent. Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. So that's a great thing. Now it's a matter of, okay, we gotta do the right thing as, you know, us from the media and advertising and ad tech industry to enable that delivery of those messages to the right people.
Absolutely. So, you know, I know we're getting low on time and we still have so many great questions to get into. So I'm trying to decide which one. So I'm just going to jump well, we all know when it is election season, just by the volume and frequency of candidate ads that we see on traditional linear TV, particularly on the local level. How can candidates leverage digital video opportunities to optimize the impact of their traditional TV campaigns?
Maybe I could start on this since I kind of touched on it a little bit before. But one of the really cool things that TiVo and BDEX do together is we're able to bring linear TV data that's deterministic and first party into the digital ecosystem by leveraging the audience device graph that BDEX has and the artificial intelligence that enables them to effectively help us connect the dots of the household footprint we have to their digital selves, so that we're working with a single source and are able to manage or help advertisers, in this case, the candidates and the agencies that support them, be able to look at, okay, if I'm going to build a campaign that's based, and I need the local linear, right? Because that's got the greatest reach. It has efficiencies tied to it. And also we have to remember who's the audience, are those that are predominantly the voters. You know, the average age of linear viewers is over 70 when it comes to news programming. So in that case, we want to then be able to really build efficiency into those that are no longer, let's say, watching local news on cable and have cut the cord. But we want to manage the efficiency and the frequency. We could effectively identify those that have exposure and non-exposure to the candidate ad or to the competing candidate and retarget digital video through connected TV. So it could be the same ad or a variation of that ad, 15 second, 30 second, etc., and retarget or at least put some funding against reaching them, but yet not, overdoing it and duplicating the efforts that we have on linear against that very same audience. So by making it more of a seamless process where we've got, let's say, those that are exposed to my campaign, and I don't want to reach those people in the digital capacity on their connected TVs, I can exclude them from the targeting initiative, which can be done, let's say, at a district level. a voter district level. And that's where you can then manage the efficiency of frequency, the number of times they see the ads, by putting caps on them. So that sort of starts to, get to the question earlier about when we get frustrated with political ads, do we see too many of them? Mm-hmm. Well, digital gives you that frequency, dial that you can turn up and down because it's done on a more interactive basis than it is on traditional TV.
It's amazing. Can't imagine if we would have had that in 2010.
Yeah.
So just to kind of wrap it up, I'm going to combine the last two questions, or try to, which was about, GDPR, CCPA, and what advertisers need to know about data privacy going into this political season. And then also your biggest piece of advice for programmatic media buyers who are navigating through political ad space right now.
I think I'll jump in on the privacy issues. I think it's important for anyone that's using data, whether for political reasons or not, to understand where their data is coming from, and understand the usage rights and the policies behind them. And so that's one of the nice things about our partnership with TiVo, with us leveraging TiVo's first party data. It's their own data. They own it. We know exactly where it came from. And with the BDEX platform itself being a privacy compliant platform where we take a lot of care in making sure that we know where the data is coming from and all the data sources are vetted. So I think that is a very important issue with respect to how you go about using data just in general. As far as my piece of advice, I guess it's really going to be about, especially going into talking about political advertising. I think that the advice would be to leverage the technology that exists today that, like we've been talking about, didn't exist in prior elections. I think that there's opportunity in the coming elections to do things that never were even possible before with respect to targeting. And I think that in doing so and targeting the right people with the right issues based on the right data is going to make a much more effective campaign going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think my advice really just piggybacks on that. And I think it's simply stated in, break the mold. Doing so obviously is always risky, but I think there is enough expertise and practice in these new channels that have opened up in reaching consumers. Traditional, addressable, linear, those are expensive initiatives, and those budgets can be, pretty much reallocated to some of these newer ways of being able to, in a very hyper targeted and focused basis and backed by deterministic data, to reach these audiences with some of those tools, like I said, that dial on frequency and so forth, being able to toggle it with linear, maximize the capability of like competitive conquesting, which we do a lot in digital. A lot of those techniques we can now do on the big screen in the home, whether it's the main one or several different ones. So I think I would, say challenge, especially with this being such a pivotal year of really changing the party majority one way or another. I think it's a perfect opportunity to take some risk.
Fantastic. Well, anything else you guys would like to add? Otherwise, I think that's a wrap.
Okay,
all right.
That was great.
So thank you so much.